HOA tried to take my farm as their public car park, but I control their power supply. When Noah Scott's peaceful farm is invaded by the Evergreen Meadows HOA, a simple parking dispute quickly escalates into a battle for his family's legacy. The HOA, led by Rachel Turner, attempts to take control of his land, but Noah uncovers a shocking secret. The entire community depends on a transformer on his farm for power. In this fight for justice, Noah uses his newfound leverage to push back against the HOA, challenging their power and exposing their corruption. Will he protect his land and legacy, or will the HOA get what they want? What would you do in Noah's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay tuned for the thrilling conclusion of this fight for justice. What would you do if your peaceful, inherited farm, your family's legacy, was suddenly invaded? But here's the twist. Not only are strangers using your land for their personal convenience, but they also depend on you for something much more powerful: electricity. Imagine waking up to the sound of engines roaring, car doors slamming, and seeing a whole fleet of vehicles parked on your property. That's exactly what happened to Noah Scott one fateful Saturday morning. It should have been a quiet, peaceful day, one where he could tend to his crops and reflect on the simple joys of farm life. But instead, Noah found himself standing at the heart of a battle he never saw coming. As if that weren't enough, the people behind this outrageous invasion didn't just want his land, they wanted to control him, his farm, and everything his family had worked for over the years. And the stakes? Higher than you could imagine. Not only was his land being used for parking, but Noah soon discovered that the very neighborhood's electricity, the lifeblood of their homes, was dependent on a transformer located on his farm. This was more than just a property dispute. It was a war over control, power, and the future of his family's heritage. Noah didn't plan on fighting his neighbors, but when it came to protecting what mattered most, his land, his crops, and his peace of mind, he was ready for battle. What started as a simple dispute over parking quickly escalated into a tense, life-changing confrontation. Noah was about to show the people of Evergreen Meadows just how far he was willing to go to protect what was rightfully his, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. It was a Saturday morning, one that Noah Scott had been looking forward to. His farm, nestled just on the outskirts of Evergreen Meadows, had been in his family for generations. The smell of fresh earth and the sight of his crops thriving in the sun always gave him a sense of peace and continuity. But that Saturday morning, that serenity was shattered. Noah had just woken up when the sound of car engines revving and doors slamming jolted him out of his peaceful sleep. Confused and angry, he threw on his robe and rushed outside, expecting to find something trivial, maybe a couple of neighbors gathering for a morning jog. But what he saw made his blood boil. At least a dozen cars were parked in neat rows across the east field of his farm. This wasn't just a few cars. It looked like an entire parking lot. And to make matters worse, the woman who appeared to be directing the cars onto his property looked utterly unfazed. Her perfect hair was neatly styled, and she carried a clipboard like she had every right to be there. Noah's heart raced with anger. He knew the land wasn't part of the Evergreen Meadows HOA development. His grandfather had always made sure of that. The idea that someone, especially the HOA, could just decide to use it for overflow parking without asking was completely unacceptable. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Noah shouted, jogging across his field toward the woman. His old farm dog, Rusty, barked loyally by his side. The woman turned, her expression more annoyed than surprised. "Good morning," she said in a tone that was meant to sound pleasant, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Rachel Turner, president of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association." "I don't care if you're the president of the United States," Noah retorted, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is private property. Your HOA is trespassing." Rachel tilted her head, as though speaking to a child who didn't understand basic facts. "Oh, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said with a fake smile. "This area was designated as community overflow parking in our HOA bylaws." Noah felt his frustration growing. He reached into his robe pocket, pulled out his phone, and showed her the deed to his property. "I've never signed any agreement with your HOA. This land has been in my family for generations, and we are not part of your development. Rachel's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Well, the previous board must have had an arrangement with your grandfather. This area has been used for overflow parking for years. Noah's mind raced. His grandfather had never mentioned anything about this. In fact, he remembered his grandfather's fierce protection of the farm's borders. My grandfather would never have allowed this, Noah snapped. He taught me to value every inch of this soil. As they argued, more neighbors started to gather, watching the confrontation unfold. Some looked embarrassed, others annoyed at the delay. One man in golf attire called out, "Hurry up, we'll be late for the tournament." But Noah's attention was no longer on the parking issue. His eyes flicked over to his tomato field, and his heart sank. A large truck was backing up, heading straight toward the plants he had spent weeks nurturing. His hands clenched into fists. "Stop that truck right now!" Noah yelled, breaking into a run. His heart pounded as the truck rolled toward the delicate tomato plants. The driver, seeing him running and waving his arms, slammed on the brakes just inches away from the crops. The woman, Rachel, had followed Noah, and she approached with an air of calm authority. "Mr. Scott," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "you're making a scene. We have a community golf tournament today, and this is the designated overflow parking area." "Says who?" Noah demanded, his voice rising in frustration. "Show me one document that has my signature on it saying this is okay." Rachel glanced at her clipboard. "Our community bylaws clearly state—" "No!" Noah interrupted, cutting her off. "I'm not part of your community." He pointed at the truck still parked on his crops. "Get these vehicles off my property. Now!" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare call the sheriff." "Oh, I would," Noah said, pulling out his phone. "I'll have them towed at the owner's expense in 1 hour." Rachel's smile faltered. "You wouldn't do that," she said, her voice taking on a more threatening edge. "Evergreen Meadows is home to the mayor, 2 city council members, and Judge Reynolds. Who do you think the sheriff will side with? Respected community leaders or one stubborn farmer?" Noah's eyes locked with hers. He felt a wave of anger and defiance rise within him. "Take your hands off me," he said sharply when Rachel moved toward him, trying to grab his wrist. "This is assault." The tension in the air was palpable. The neighbors had gathered closer now, whispering among themselves. One elderly man stepped forward. "Maybe we should just move the cars if this is really his property," he suggested, his voice careful. Rachel's face twisted in frustration. "This is HOA property now," she snapped, as if that settled it. Noah's heart raced with disbelief. The HOA had no legal claim on his farm, yet they were acting like they owned it. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was a fight for control. And Noah wasn't about to back down. As the confrontation with Rachel Turner and her entourage simmered down, Noah returned to his farmhouse, his mind racing. He knew his grandfather had always been fiercely protective of their land, but the implications of what had just happened, people parking on his fields, disrupting his crops, made him wonder just how far the HOA had been willing to push things. He glanced over at the remains of his tomato patch, the tire tracks leaving deep grooves in the soil. His stomach twisted with a mix of anger and helplessness. But something inside him sparked, a realization that this wasn't just about cars on his land. It was about something much bigger, something that could turn the tables in his favor. Noah grabbed his keys and stormed out the door. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about all of this. Why had Rachel been so confident in her actions? It didn't make sense. She had mentioned an easement for parking, but he had never signed any agreement. His grandfather's legacy was about to be tested, and he wasn't about to let them walk all over him. He drove to the county records office, his mind racing. As he walked through the quiet lobby, Noah felt the weight of the decision he was about to make. It wasn't just about fighting the HOA anymore. It was about uncovering the truth and protecting what was his. The receptionist, an older gentleman named Frank Jenkins, greeted him with a smile. "What can I help you with, Mr. Scott?" he asked. "I need to check the property records for the Miller farm. Specifically, I need to see if there are any easements or agreements attached to my land," Noah replied, his voice firm. "Sure thing," Frank said, leading Noah to a small research room. "Been here for 30 years. Your grandfather, he was a smart man, always on top of things." Noah's heart skipped a beat. You knew him? Frank nodded. Knew him well. That land? He fought tooth and nail to keep it out of the hands of developers. They tried to buy it from him for years, but he always refused. A surge of pride filled Noah's chest. He knew his grandfather had been a man of principle, but hearing it from Frank made him even more determined to fight back. I need to know if there's anything in the records about parking easements or public access, he said. Frank began pulling out thick folders and flipping through pages. Noah waited anxiously, the silence in the room only amplifying his growing unease. After what felt like hours, Frank looked up and gave Noah a knowing smile. Well, I've got some news for you. There's no easement for parking or public access on your property. Not a single document showing your grandfather ever agreed to let the HOA use his land for anything, Frank said, leaning back in his chair. Noah's breath escaped in a rush. So they've been lying? Frank nodded. That's right. But there's something else that's interesting. He pulled out a yellowing document and laid it on the table. Your grandfather granted an easement to the power company about 30 years ago. Noah's mind raced. The power company? Frank pointed to a faded map showing the layout of the property. Right here. According to this, the main transformer supplying electricity to Evergreen Meadows is on your land. Your grandfather negotiated the easement when the development was first built. The power company pays you $500 a year for access. Noah stared at the map, his mind reeling. The HOA was playing a dangerous game by trespassing on his land. But this was something else entirely. If the HOA was relying on his property for power and he controlled that access, it could change everything. Wait, Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you telling me that the HOA's entire community depends on my land for electricity? Frank's eyes twinkled as he looked at Noah. Exactly. They've been getting power from that transformer for years, and as the legal owner of the property, you control access to it. Noah's pulse quickened. Can they move it? Frank shook his head. Not easily. It would cost a small fortune and require county approval. Plus, they'd need new permits and probably a long service interruption. Not to mention, they'd need your permission to terminate the current easement. A flood of ideas rushed through Noah's mind. He had the leverage he needed to push back against the HOA's brazen invasion. But something else gnawed at him. The fact that the power company had never paid him directly. About the payments, Noah asked, his voice tense. I never received any money for this easement. Where has it been going? Frank clicked a few keys on his computer. Ah, here it is. The payments have been going into a trust account under your grandfather's name. Since his passing, they've been accumulating there. You'll need to contact Pinewood Electric to update the payment details. Noah's mind raced. This was his moment. The HOA had no idea what they were up against, and he was about to show them exactly how powerful his position was. He thanked Frank and left the office, clutching the documents in his hands. As he drove back to his farm, he made the call to Pinewood Electric's emergency line, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This is Noah Scott. I own the property where Transformer Station E245 is located. I need to speak with someone immediately about unauthorized access to this equipment, he said, barely able to contain his excitement. After being transferred twice, Noah finally reached the operations manager. I'm Ron Fletcher, the manager said. What seems to be the problem? Noah quickly explained the situation, and Ron's tone shifted to one of concern. That transformer serves over 200 homes in Evergreen Meadows. Only authorized personnel should be anywhere near it. Exactly, Noah said, his voice unwavering. I'll be installing security cameras on the property today. I need to confirm who has legitimate access to the equipment. Ron assured him that only Pinewood Electric technicians with proper ID would be allowed near the transformer, and agreed to send over a maintenance schedule so Noah could stay informed. As Noah pulled into his driveway, he felt a surge of triumph. He wasn't just defending his land anymore. He was taking control of the situation, and the HOA had no idea what was coming for them. By the time Noah returned home, the air had shifted. What had started as a simple property dispute was quickly turning into a full-fledged war with the HOA. The documents from the county records office and the confirmation from Pinewood Electric about the power transformer had given Noah the leverage he needed. But he knew it wouldn't be enough to stop the HOA from pushing forward with their plans. They were ruthless, and now they were aware that Noah wasn't going to back down easily. Noah was still trying to process everything when he saw the black SUV pull up to his farmhouse. He recognized the faces of Rachel Turner and Daniel Turner, the HOA attorney, stepping out of the vehicle, followed by two other individuals. One of them was a city councilman named Paul Jackson, known for his political influence, and the other, a young woman with a clipboard, holding herself like she was in charge. Noah's pulse quickened as they approached his porch. Rachel led the charge, her voice calm but with an underlying edge. "Mr. Scott," she said, her smile dripping with insincerity, "we've brought the parking agreement for you to sign. It's just a formality, really." Noah stood firm, refusing to move. "I told you before, there is no agreement. Your HOA doesn't have the right to park on my property, and you're not getting anything signed from me." Rachel's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "I'm sure you'll reconsider once you understand how this can benefit both of us," she said, glancing over her shoulder at Paul Jackson, who nodded slightly, urging Noah to listen. Noah didn't flinch. He pulled out the documents he'd gathered, the easement agreement for the power company, the map showing the location of the transformer, and the correspondence from Pinewood Electric. He laid them out on the table, his hands steady despite the rising tension. "I've just come from the county records office," Noah said coolly, his voice low but filled with authority. "There's no easement for parking or public access on my land. Never has been." He turned to Daniel Turner, the HOA's lawyer, "and I have more than enough evidence to back it up." Rachel's facade began to crack. Her voice tightened. "Old paperwork can always be updated. These things are complicated," she said, but Noah could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. Noah leaned in, his gaze unwavering. "What I found goes beyond parking. It's about the power supply. I've discovered that the transformer serving your entire community is on my land, and now I'm revoking access for any non-essential maintenance until this matter is resolved." Rachel's face paled, and Daniel's jaw clenched. Paul Jackson, the city councilman, cleared his throat, his voice a bit more cautious now. "Listen, we understand this is a difficult situation, but we can work something out. We can settle this without things getting ugly." But Noah wasn't backing down. "No, you'll remove the vehicles from my property by the end of the day, and you'll pay for the damage done to my crops. Or I'll have the sheriff involved, and every vehicle will be towed at the owner's expense. This is my property, and you've overstepped your boundaries." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare," she spat, but Noah could hear the hesitation in her voice. The presence of the documents and the knowledge he had gained was starting to make her nervous. "I would," Noah said firmly. "Try me." Before they could respond, he pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff. The tension was palpable as the call went through, and Noah felt a sense of vindication with each second that passed. The sheriff, who had always been responsive to Noah's calls, confirmed that a deputy would arrive shortly. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. But Noah wasn't finished yet. He pulled out the easement document related to the power transformer, holding it up for them to see. "This transformer is on my land. The power that runs through your entire neighborhood is dependent on me. And if I decide to cut off access, you'll be in the dark, literally." Rachel, Daniel, and Paul all exchanged uncomfortable glances. Noah could feel the power shift in his favor. The community's dependency on the electricity was a weak point, and he was prepared to exploit it. The fear was clear in their eyes, and for the first time, Noah could see the tables turning. "We're not trying to make this harder for you, Mr. Scott," Paul Jackson said, trying to regain control of the situation. "But we are trying to protect the interests of the community. Surely, there's a way we can come to an agreement." Noah's response was immediate and final. "There's nothing to negotiate. My land is not yours, and I won't allow it to be treated as if it is. Now get these cars off my property and pay for the damage you've caused." Rachel looked like she was about to argue, but the sound of sirens interrupted her. A local news van had just pulled up, and Noah knew that his next move would set the course for what was about to unfold. The game had changed. The stakes were no longer just about parking and power. It was about justice, power, and the integrity of his family's farm. The HOA members exchanged nervous glances, knowing they had lost the upper hand. But before they could respond, Noah turned on his heel and walked into his house, leaving them standing on his porch, staring after him. The next day, Noah sat quietly at his farmhouse, the weight of everything he had uncovered bearing down on him. His hand trembled slightly as he flipped through the papers he'd gathered, property deeds, easement agreements, and photos of the damage to his crops. He had everything he needed to expose the HOA's lies and their plans to take his land, but the real battle was about to begin. The phone rang. It was Mia Thompson, one of the few neighbors who had supported Noah through the ordeal. "Noah, there's an emergency HOA meeting tonight," she said urgently. "They're trying to push through a vote to officially take your land for parking. Margaret's already circulating a forged document that has your grandfather's signature on it. You need to show up." Noah's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He had to confront the HOA, and he had to do it in front of everyone. His pulse quickened as he prepared himself mentally for what was about to unfold. By the time Noah arrived at the community center, the room was already buzzing with tension. A large projector screen was set up at the front, with slides showing various developments and future plans for the Evergreen Meadows community. But Noah could see that the focus was already on him. Rachel Turner was at the front, speaking animatedly, while the rest of the board members looked at him with varying degrees of disdain. He walked in slowly, his steps purposeful. The room went silent as soon as he entered, all eyes on him. Rachel froze mid-sentence, her smile faltering as Noah made his way to the front. "Ah, Mr. Scott," Rachel said, trying to mask her discomfort with a tight smile. "How nice of you to join us. We were just discussing the future of this community and your farm. Everyone, please, let's give him a moment to speak." Noah ignored her thinly veiled sarcasm and, without missing a beat, set up his laptop, connecting it to the projector. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Noah could feel the weight of the moment. This was his chance to expose the truth. "I think you'll want to give me more than 2 minutes," Noah said coolly, as the first slide appeared on the screen. The room quieted as the document appeared, his property deed, with clear boundaries, showing that Evergreen Meadows was not part of his land. "This," Noah said loudly, "is my property. This land has been in my family for generations, and I have never signed any agreement with your HOA, not for parking, not for anything." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People started murmuring to one another, exchanging surprised looks. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and Noah could see her trying to regain control of the room. "But I'm sure you all are wondering about something else," Noah continued, clicking to the next slide. The screen now displayed the forged document that had been circulated by the HOA. A piece of paper with his grandfather's signature, dated just months ago, claiming that his grandfather had agreed to allow the HOA to use the land for parking. "This document," Noah said, "is a forgery. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago. There is no way this is his signature. I've seen his handwriting, and this is a poor attempt to manipulate you all." The room fell into an eerie silence as Rachel's face flushed bright red. Some members of the audience were looking around, questioning the validity of the document. A few stood up and leaned closer to the screen, whispering among themselves. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but Noah quickly clicked to the next slide. An email thread between her and Daniel Turner, as well as a few other HOA board members. The subject line read, "Plans for annexing the farm," and the contents were chilling. The emails detailed their strategies for forcing Noah to give up his land and how they planned to escalate the pressure if he didn't comply. "This," Noah said, his voice steady but filled with undeniable authority, "is your HOA at work. These are the emails where you discussed how to bully me into submission and take control of my land. You even discussed hiring legal teams to force me out." Rachel's fake smile was now gone. Her hands trembled as she gripped the podium in front of her. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice wavering. "We've always had a plan to work with you, Noah. There's no need for this kind of attack." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding here, Rachel." Noah shot back, his voice rising now. "I'm not the one who's been lying. I'm not the one who's been manipulating this community for my own gain. You've been using my land as a parking lot without permission, and now you're trying to claim ownership of it." A murmur spread through the room, and more hands shot up, eager to ask questions. Noah turned to face them, taking control of the moment. "You all deserve to know the truth," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to be left alone to run my farm in peace. But I'm not going to stand by while you let a few people who think they can do whatever they want, destroy what's been in my family for generations." Paul Jackson, the city councilman, stood up, his face tight with frustration. "Listen, Mr. Scott," he said, trying to regain some semblance of control. "This isn't just about parking. We're trying to build a community here. Your land, your farm, it's standing in the way of progress." "Progress?" Noah repeated, incredulity in his voice. "What kind of progress is it to trample over someone's property, to force them to give up what they've worked for all their life? This isn't progress. It's greed." The room was silent for a moment. Noah's words hung in the air, leaving an impression. Slowly, some of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others seemed to reconsider their positions. Rachel's face twisted in anger, but she said nothing. Noah clicked to the next slide, revealing the final piece of his evidence, the easement agreement with Pinewood Electric. "And here's the kicker," he said, his voice laced with triumph. "This transformer that powers your entire community, it's on my land. Without me, you have no power. You've been depending on my generosity without even asking for years." Gasps filled the room. People looked at each other in shock, some unable to process the implications of what Noah had just revealed. "I'm not threatening your power," Noah clarified, holding up the easement document. "But I will not allow anyone to tamper with what's mine. If you want to fix this, the first thing you need to do is acknowledge that this land is not yours, and you need to pay for the damage you've done to my crops." Rachel's face was a study in fury. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium as she glared at Noah. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Scott," she spat. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You've crossed the line." Noah stood firm, unwavering in his resolve. "No, Rachel, you crossed the line when you decided to take what wasn't yours, but now it's over." The tension in the room was thick, and for the first time, Noah felt the power shift completely in his favor. The truth was out, and there was no way the HOA could bury it. The crowd had seen the documents, heard the truth, and now they were beginning to question everything they'd been told. Paul Jackson opened his mouth to speak, but Noah cut him off. "I'm done negotiating. You have until 5 p.m. today to remove all vehicles from my property and compensate me for the damage you've caused. Or I'll take this to court, and I'll make sure every single one of you is held accountable." With that, Noah turned and walked out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind him. The battle was far from over, but he had just delivered the decisive blow. The days that followed the public meeting were some of the longest of Noah's life. The battle he just fought was far from over, but as he looked out at his fields, now cleared of the parked cars and a little bit of the tension that had been hanging in the air, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The HOA had underestimated him. They had underestimated his knowledge, his resolve, and most importantly, his willingness to protect what was rightfully his. However, the true victory came when he received a phone call late one evening. It was from the local news station. "We've got a story for you, Mr. Scott," the reporter said, excitement in his voice. "We've got confirmation from the power company about the tampering with the transformer. Your evidence has sparked an investigation into the HOA's actions. We've got everything. Emails, forged documents, the whole plan. They had to force you out. This is bigger than just a parking dispute. You've got their whole scheme exposed." Noah's breath caught in his throat. The confirmation was one thing, but hearing the news station back him up, seeing how his fight had gone public, he knew it was just a matter of time before the entire HOA was exposed for their misconduct. They had been so smug, so convinced they could bulldoze through him, that they never thought someone like Noah Scott would stand up and fight back. But now they had no escape. A few days later, the hammer finally fell. Rachel Turner, Daniel Turner, and several other members of the HOA board were arrested. The police found the forged documents they had used to try and gain control of Noah's farm, and the investigation revealed that they had been secretly diverting funds for years. The scheme they had concocted to pressure Noah into submission had backfired spectacularly. Rachel, in particular, felt the full weight of her arrogance. She had underestimated Noah's ability to fight back and thought that her position as HOA president made her untouchable. When the police arrived at her house to arrest her, the once confident woman was a broken shell, unable to maintain her facade of control. The community that she had tried to manipulate with lies and deceit turned against her, demanding accountability. In a cruel twist of fate, Paul Jackson, the city councilman who had sided with Rachel, lost his position as well. His involvement in the HOA's corrupt dealings came to light, and soon his political career was in ruins. The voters who had once trusted him turned their backs, disgusted by his willingness to be a part of such a corrupt system. Meanwhile, Noah watched from the sidelines as the community of Evergreen Meadows slowly began to piece itself back together. Without the corrupt leadership of Rachel and her team, the HOA was disbanded, and a new board was elected, one that would actually listen to the people and respect the property rights of those like Noah. They made efforts to restore what had been damaged by the illegal actions of the previous administration. And the first thing they did, they apologized to Noah for the harm they had caused. As for Noah, the victory was bittersweet. He'd fought for his farm, for his grandfather's legacy, and for his peace of mind. But the real lesson came when he realized that this fight wasn't just about his land. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. The people who had tried to force him off his land, the ones who thought they could manipulate the system for their own benefit, had finally paid the price for their greed. And Noah had won, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever felt powerless against the system. In the end, Noah got back to his farm, tending to his crops with a sense of pride and relief. The battle had been long, but he had emerged victorious. His farm was his own, his land was his own, and the people who had tried to take it from him were now nothing more than a cautionary tale. The lesson was simple. Sometimes standing your ground is the only way to ensure justice is done. And when the system fails, when those in power get too comfortable and think they can't be challenged, it only takes one person to remind them of what happens when they push too far. And Noah Scott? He was more than just a stubborn farmer now. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder to anyone who would try to take what wasn't theirs. You may have the power, but it's the truth that always wins in the end. After a tense showdown, Noah Scott stands victorious. The Evergreen Meadows HOA's corrupt leaders are exposed, their deceitful plans unraveled, and Noah's family legacy is preserved. With the support of his neighbors, he reclaims control over his farm and ensures justice is served. Noah's battle proves that sometimes standing up for what's right takes more than just courage. It takes uncovering the truth and fighting back. Do you think Noah made the right call in taking on the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories of resilience and justice.